Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Japan launches its centralized intelligence agency amid concerns. Chinese companies unveil a new wave of AI models. And Spain fully deploys sea barrier as the number of deaths of Ceuta migrant crisis rises. Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Do Hongyu in Beijing. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. Our first story. China has called on Japan to draw lessons from history and act with caution following the establishment of a new National Intelligence Bureau. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said Japan's wartime intelligence agencies helped support militarism and overseas aggression, causing serious suffering in Asia. Japan launched its new centralized intelligence body following legislation enacted in May to create the National Intelligence Council. This is the first centralized intelligence institute that Japan established after the World War II. Now for more, we're joined by Professor Chu Qiang, Fellow of the Belt and Road Research Center at Minzu University of China. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor. First of all, how is Japan's intelligence framework different from that of the other countries? Why is it raising concerns in China and other countries that suffered under Japanese military during World War II?
Well, actually, I think this time the Japanese system of intelligence actually has been a little bit of concern. I smell something very familiar like 50 or 70 years ago. Well, I think every sovereign country, well, yes, they have authorized to have this intelligence or national security related, agencies for sure. But Japan actually has made it more than what it really can need it. For a very long time, Japan have all kinds of agencies regarding its, international security and also the intelligence work. For example, they have the Foreign Ministry. They got the Ministry of Defense, they got the Police Bureau, and also they have the Public Security Investigation Bureau, and several. I hope my translation is right because I always use Japanese to pronounce them. They've been doing what they seem, really enough in their own area. For example, if it concerns public security, public safety, and they go to the Police and Investigation Bureau. If it concerns about the basic national defense security, go to the Ministry of the Defense, or concerns about the general, national foreign affairs, you go to the Foreign Ministry. But this time, they have been putting them together. Actually, they try to answer, all these kind of the questions and reporting to the Prime Minister himself. So that is, very, very different because that means a very independent budget and also a much more concentrated power and also all kinds of resources at the hand of this new agency. And also, I think the current prime minister probably have a very, very bad name because she is very aggressive. She wants to push Japan back into the new frontier as a militarized country. So I think that actually has been, sending out a very strong signal for this, the Japan's new move.
Japan launched the new centralized intelligence agency system on July 31st, which is reminiscent of Unit 731. What does this signal?
I personally think this is not just a coincidence. I think the current Japan administration, on purpose picked this, very bad numbers combination. I cannot just, to say this is not purposefully picked about the day that stand for the army number of the 731 army, because this army actually is the one who purposefully investigated all the countries surrounding Japan. They've been doing, the bioexaminations in China with the germs, with the toxic matters, with anatomy, in a brutal way. And the victim actually is not only Chinese. We're talking about the Koreans, Mongolians, Australian, New Zealander, Americans, and also Japanese themselves. So I think that is probably the worst way one country or one army are doing so-called national security related investigation. So 731. I really want everybody to remember that because I'm sure every one of you have your own citizen victims, used to be in this prison of the Unit 731. And I think this signal itself also has been representing something even worse currently. I think number one is current Japan actually has been, accepted the peaceful constitution, which means Japan currently by law should have this kind of a passive national defense instead of having this kind of a pragmatic or these kind of the subjective aggressions. And now Japan set up as a new intelligence agency. Means it's not passive anymore. It's not defensive anymore. It's very much aggressive. So we've been using as a network of the intelligence, network for bugging, network for spies, helping the unit of self-defense to go out. And also with this stratified intelligence capabilities, they probably can develop something else like the longer range missiles and also the export of the all kinds of weapons and also very precise hit with these missiles and the drones. And also, I think, reporting to the prime minister themselves. Come on, this is not what Japan's prime minister system used to do. It's not America. It's not a president, system. So, which means actually the Takaichi, the prime minister, are actually using the military and security resources, help herself to centralize the power. We're talking about probably not only aiming about international issues, and this is just an excuse. He's probably going to use it to marginalize her enemies in Japan and also try to neutralize her competitors in the Japanese political arena.
There have been strong voices of opposition within Japan. Japanese citizens have taken to the streets in Tokyo to protest against the establishment of the National Intelligence Bureau. What are the concerns among the Japanese public, and what impact will the Bureau have on Japan?
I think the number one concern is the overstepping of the public power and also the going backward of the history. I think the protest actually has been, showing this kind of a concern. Well, if you're familiar with what happened during the Second World War, is the military Japan or the imperialist Japan government actually overstepped every corner in the private life. There's no you and me. There's no individuals. They're only, the Banzai Tenno, and the only, your loyalty to the militaries. So everything and whatever you do is part of the country's need. So we're talking about the infringement and the destruction of the personal privacy, your freedom, and the overabuse of the surveillance and monitoring of the people. So it smelled very similar to the current Japan because after the Second World War, I think America actually made this country another system. So government cannot overstep people's daily life anymore. People's human rights and also privacy should be at least respected by law. But now these agencies openly defied everything the post-war Japan has been standing for, and it smells very much the same like the during the war Japan used to do. So I think that has been shaking the root of the peace principles of the current Japan, and they're probably going back again to the military setup. And what do you know about maybe this next step is them probably going to launch some other special actions against their adjacent country and also use it as an excuse to imprison their own citizen again.
Now, China has repeatedly warned against Japan's new militarism moves. How are Japan's push to revise its pacifist constitution, its previous lifting of the lethal arms export ban, its nuclear ambitions, and the recent move to centralize its intelligence work interconnected?
Well, I think these are not isolated pieces. I think these are just different pieces for the same chess game. And I think the only target is to allow Japan to shake off the shackle of the peaceful constitution, to make Japan a defensive country into aggressive country. So which allows Japan, by law, by all kinds of principles, can be a country sending out the army, invade the other country, and sell out all kinds of the weapons to make profit. So the national intelligence is just one eyes help this government to collect all the resources and try to optimize this, all kinds of the moves. And the next step, why do they ever need that in the first step? So why do you need to understand where you can sell the weapons, where have probably the loopholes like Afghanistan? Okay, they probably need some missiles, or in the Ukraine, they probably need some drones, or in some other area, they probably need some rifles. So National Security Agency of Japan currently can help Japanese government to understand this demand. And next step, is they can remove the ban of their businesses, because that in Japan, Japan is still one of the largest manufacturing company of the whole, or manufacturing power of the whole world. Many most advanced companies like the Mitsubishi and Mitsui, and they are making mechanics and machines currently for sure, but just with a little bit improvement, those assembly line can make missiles, drones, and tanks, and also the warships. So once this kind of a market has been activated, those manufacturers can immediately switch themselves into the national defense complex. So they can make money, they can send out the weapons, they can do the proliferations. And also more than that, when they collect enough so-called information, they can help the prime minister to revise the constitution. So it's not peaceful constitution anymore. It's the constitution allows the ambition of the former imperial Japan to come back. So this is, what we call eto dense, which means something come back from the dirt, in history. And when you launch this eto dense, you will see a ghost will come back from the closet, and also this ghost is going to haunt all the kinds of adjacent neighboring countries and deliver the nightmare to the world again.
Thank you very much. That was Professor Chu Qiang, Fellow of the Belt and Road Research Center at Minzu University of China. You're listening to World Today. China's AI industry is once again making headlines. Companies including DeepSeek, Minimax, and ByteDance have unveiled a new wave of AI models, pushing the boundaries of multimodal intelligence, video generation, and AI agents. The rapid pace of innovation comes as Chinese open-source models continue gaining global traction. The Ministry of Industry and Information Technology says China's open-source AI ecosystem has surpassed 10 billion downloads worldwide. Chinese-developed models have overtaken U.S. models, accounting for 41% of global downloads on Hugging Face, the world's largest open-source AI platform. The latest data also shows that the 6 most widely used large language models are from Chinese teams. For more, Zhao Yang spoke with Li Luan, an assistant professor of economics at Peking University.
So, Professor Li Luan, thank you very much for joining us. Several leading Chinese AI companies, including DeepSeek and ByteDance, have unveiled major new models almost simultaneously. So tell us more about it. Does it mean that China's AI industry has entered a new phase of innovation?
Yeah, so we're seeing a release of different models by different AI companies. For example, DeepSeek have upgraded their agent capacities of V4 Flash and added some native compatibility with their responses API. Minimax, for example, introduced their H3, which can combine text, image, video, and audio understanding. Can also generate 2K video with native stereo sound. ByteDance has also, put forward their C-Dance 2.5, which can extend video generation to 30 seconds. So I think the industry is moving much beyond conversational chatbots. So we're seeing, for example, the focus is not just keeping an AI model that could talk with the agent, but rather on AI agents that could execute different tasks, and also having these so-called multimodal systems that could understand not only text but also several forms of information, including pictures and also video and audio. So I do think this is looking more like a transition to a specialized type of model. So not all Chinese companies are all competing to have the same general purpose chatbot, but rather different firms are kind of developing different comparative advantages in whether in coding, in agents, in video, audio generation, in long context processing, and so on and so forth. So I do think that China's industry, when we look at so many innovations at such a short period of time, I think it's entering a phase of diversified innovation. So less focused on having the same product, but rather focus on building a complete range of intelligent tools and intelligent agents.
And China's open source AI models are seeing remarkable global adoption. So what are the key factors driving this rapid rise?
Yeah, I think the first factor is definitely, cost efficiency or cost performance ratio. So when we look at the Chinese models, so basically they're much more cost efficient. Usually, it supports a more economical use of these computing resources and allows, small and medium enterprises, whether in China and globally, to kind of use these models with relatively low cost. And oftentimes, the cost is a fraction of what the competitors, especially for example, ChatGPT and Cloud has offered. And also, I think the second factor is the ability to have more control with the open weight models, because these open weight models can be downloaded, they can be adapted and operated on locally, especially for in a company's own infrastructure. So this is especially going to matter because businesses, they have concern about their data privacy, their customization, and also in terms of not paying too much for the API prices if the prices for tokens surge. So I think these advantages are uniquely provided by the open source or open weight models that Chinese companies are offering. And I think the third factor is that Chinese models right now have an entire ecosystem, as we have talked about. So developers or companies, they can choose among different for example, large reasoning models or models for coding, models for video generation, and also video models for specialized industrial purposes. So China is offering the whole spectrum of different models. So instead of having just one flagship product, say ChatGPT or DeepSeek, it's offering a menu of different models for different budgets and different applications. So in conclusion, I think Chinese models are rising not because they're cheap or they're only cost efficient, but I do think they offer developers a more secure and also more alternative and more options with a combination of capability, affordability, and freedom of deployment.
And China now accounts for 41% of the global downloads of the open source AI models. So what does it suggest about the changing balance of influence and innovation in the global AI ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think, when we talk about the influence of AI models, I think simply looking at, for example, whose model is the best or the cleverest or has the so-called highest benchmark score is not sufficient. So, for example, a lot of Chinese models may not be leading in the leaderboards, especially when it comes to the reasoning capacity. But I think with the advantages of the open weight model that we just mentioned, a lot of models are downloaded and deployed locally, and actually we could have a large amount of infrastructure surrounding AI actually being built using Chinese models. So the influence for these Chinese AI models, and also in terms of the future direction of how technological diffusion is going to become, is going to be more centered around Chinese models. So I think China was previously regarded mainly as a user and adapter of technologies. But right now, Chinese laboratories or Chinese companies are increasingly becoming the provider, the supplier of frontier research, and also in terms of AI applications, AI infrastructures, we are also a good provider of those. So I do think that despite some companies or some analysts may say, downloads are different from revenue, from profit, but I do think they signal a very important fact that, China is building its influence of not just becoming, the single source of providing these chatbots or APIs, but also becoming a part of the important building blocks of global AI, especially when it comes to technology developments and also applications.
So China has embraced the open source AI, while many leading US companies continue to rely on closed models. So why have these two ecosystems taken such different approaches?
Yeah, I think the difference partly reflects difference in business models. So a lot of American frontier companies such as OpenAI and Cloud, they have invested a large sums of money in training, and to recover that development cost, they do seek to establish some sort of monopoly in this market and also gain a lot of profit. That's why they're charging such a high price. For a lot of Chinese models, they do also invested a lot in the beginning, but also I think in terms of our developing cost, there's ways of kind of reduce or control that development cost. For example, DeepSeek is not a very expensive model to develop in the first place, and this allows, for example, a lot of Chinese companies to allow or keep the openness, which also serves as a different competitive advantage because it reduces the disadvantages associated with, for example, you couldn't use some of the global models in China, and also in terms of distribution, you would need a cloud server, or you need to deploy the AI model somewhere else, and you don't have for example, the local control and data privacy, advantage that Chinese developers are providing. And also, I think one important factor is that when we're offering the open weight models, we can also benefit developing countries, especially. For example, the open weight models, they can be hosted and modified and adapted locally, especially adapted to local languages, and also connected to the domestic internet, domestic education, public service systems in developing countries. So we are already seeing a lot of countries using Chinese models and deploying these open weight models locally to kind of use for their own purposes. So I do think in the future, open weight AI can definitely lower the entry barrier for a lot of developing countries. But I do think, having a combination of both having some open weight models, but also the competition from closed weight models, I'm anxious to see, which of the two ecosystem can be, proven to be more sustainable in the future.
So some senior U.S. officials have recently said they will launch investigations into Chinese AI companies over so-called distillation of leading U.S. frontier models. While at the same time, nearly 200 Silicon Valley startups argue that Chinese open source models are reducing the development costs and speeding up the innovation. So why has the U.S. tech sector become so divided over this issue?
Yeah, so I think the division is really reflecting a conflict of their interest, right? So the frontier model companies like ChatGPT or Cloud, they do want to protect their expensive models that they have trained and developed. On the other hand, startups, software companies, independent developers, they want access to the cheapest and most affordable model that's also capable and available. So I think this is reflecting a conflict of interest. And also when it comes to, for example, chip makers, cloud providers, they may also favor, the so-called closed models rather than open models because, different model uses, they're going to generate different demand for computing infrastructure. So when it comes to the point of about distillation, I think the relevant question is about whether the access or the process was authorized, whether any restrictions were violated, because distillation itself is a standard technical method. It's not to say Chinese models are learning or using anything to kind of improve their capability in an unjust way. So I do think this is reflecting some of the skepticism of U.S. officials of doubting why Chinese models can achieve to such a point in such a short period of time, and they're using distillation as a way to attack Chinese models. And I do think that in terms of the opposition from the startups. They're demonstrating that Chinese models have actually already entered the U.S. technology supply chain. So a lot of startups are actually using Chinese open weight models on a daily basis. So if we are kind of having these investigations by U.S. officials on Chinese models, this is going to increase the development cost and for these startup companies. And I do think that I doubt if there's going to be a blanket restriction because it would definitely damage both the developers and also firms. But I do think in the long run, it will also raise costs and reduce competition.
That was Li Luan with Peking University. Let's take a short break.
Welcome. I'm Elaf Elad, economics professor and member of the Data Science and AI Center at New York University, Shanghai. On the World Today program, you can find in-depth and impartial insight, as well as critical commentary on key trends in the Chinese economy, financial technology, business, and blockchain. To prepare for the world tomorrow, join me on World Today.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money has a story to tell. Because every business story is a human story. Global Business.
Hello, my name is Alessandro Golombieski Teixeira. I'm a professor of public policy and management at Tsinghua University in Beijing. I am a great listener of The World Today. In my opinion, The World Today is one of the best China radio programs. In The World Today, we can get the best news and analysis in what is happening now in the world. So please, come to join us.
You're listening to World Today with me, Do Hongyu, in Beijing. Over 70 people have died from the mass migrant crossings into Spain's North African enclave of Ceuta. Over 50,000 people crossed into the region by land and sea last Thursday, prompting alarm across the European Union. Spanish authorities say most of them have returned to Morocco. Spain has fully deployed a floating sea barrier along the maritime border of Ceuta to prevent irregular sea crossings. For more, we're joined by Hussein Askari, Vice President of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Askari.
Thank you very much for inviting me. My pleasure.
Yeah, first of all, could you help us understand what triggered the mass migrant crossings into Ceuta?
Well, there is always a very large number of migrants, both Moroccan but also from sub-Saharan African countries, on standby for any opportunity to cross the borders to Europe. But this time it was rumored, or it was a decision by the Spanish Supreme Court ruling on the treatment of migrants arriving by sea in Ceuta and Melilla. Now, arriving by sea is interesting because the ruling said that migrants who reach Spanish territory by sea cannot be subject to automatic returns without being, judged administratively on individual basis. So that's why most people, or all of them, actually, they took to the sea. And then, of course, there are many people who cannot swim, did not make it. And that's a big tragedy for the people. So this was misinterpretation of the Supreme Court ruling, which many people say is the reason for that.
Mm-hmm. Then what are the maybe deeper reasons? For example, why do these people swim to Ceuta and the cost of their lives? What are they seeking for?
Well, that's a very good question because we have to look at the root causes of all these things. We have economic issues all over Africa, of course, with the lack of development, the lack of future options for the young people, lack of employment, and it's a reality of life. And therefore, one of the big problems of the discussion about migration in Europe is that it does not really address the root causes of this problem. Why do people leave their countries? And the other reason is, of course, geopolitical reasons that force people to leave their countries. And unfortunately, the EU and NATO have supported many of the regime change wars in Africa, like in Libya, but also in West Asia, Middle East, which forced millions of people out of their homes. And without dealing with these root causes, it's very, very difficult to control this. Of course, governments in Africa have responsibility towards their people, but their resources are limited. Their action plan span is limited. So therefore, the EU, they need to do things like what China is doing in Africa, building infrastructure, building industry, modernizing the economy through the Belt and Road Initiative. This is what Europe can do.
Most crossing migrants were swiftly returned to Morocco following the surge. What diplomatic leverage exists between Spain and Morocco behind this mass repatriation, and how will this temporary cooperation affect bilateral ties?
Yeah, well, I think this is, of course, it's a big downturn in the bilateral relations. I mean, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez called this a violation of the sovereignty of Spain, that this is not simply individuals violating the rules, but that this was a national crisis. There are many security and police cooperation agreements between Morocco and Spain. There are also visa regulations. Many people in Morocco, they can travel to Spain and the EU through a tourist visa if they have a job, if they have a income. That's not a big problem. The problem is when, of course, we have a large numbers of young people who are not, who are unemployed. They don't see any future in their own country. But the biggest problem is the third country nationals who are also in Morocco. And these third country nationals, the EU and Morocco has not managed to reach an agreement on repatriating them to Morocco. Morocco refuses to take back these immigrants who, if they cross from Morocco into Spain, Europe, Morocco refuses to take. These are mostly from sub-Saharan African countries. So this is not a good situation for the relations, but I think the diplomatic relations between Spain and Morocco are very strong, and I don't think it will be badly affected, but it will leave some scars.
Now, the scale of the crossings has raised concerns across the European Union. Does this crisis expose broader weaknesses in the EU's migration and asylum policies?
Yeah, well, we have in the EU, we have for like many years now a heated discussion about immigration into the EU and what rules apply. And the problem is that each country wants to throw the burden on someone else. I mean, we had the Italians criticizing Spain now, but Italy received the largest number of illegal immigrants, asylum seekers last year. So these countries, they're trying to shift blame to one another. They try to share the burden, but many countries are refusing to do that. And then you have the frontier countries on the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe who receive the largest numbers, but then you have the other nations who are further north refusing to contribute to that situation. So there's total disagreement in the EU how to deal with this. But as I said before, instead of trying to find ways of not letting people into Europe, we have to think about what are the root causes. Why do people leave their countries? What are the geopolitical problems, the wars, the lack of economic development? And if the EU does not address these issues in Africa and West Asia, these crises will continue.
Do you think Europe is entering a new phase of migration pressure with these historic crossings? And how might this influence EU policies on border security, immigration, and also relations with neighboring countries?
Well, according to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in 2025, there are 117 million people who were either internally displaced, that they are migrants within their own countries due to economic and political and security issues, or they are cross-border displaced people who are fleeing wars, for example, or pandemics or whatever. And this has been increasing in the past 30, 40 years. There are no signs that this is diminishing. And therefore, the issue here is, of course, Europe will face a new wave. It's natural inclination among human beings to try to move somewhere else where they can find safety and better living conditions. But there is no way of controlling all these millions of people trying to cross borders and move to safety and better life. The important thing is to find out how to deal with these issues in their home countries, and the EU could contribute to that. So we can face new immigration problems. I mean, there's also a false side of this immigration debate in the EU because many of the immigrants who come here, they contribute largely to the economic development, to the social services, to all kinds of economic activity and social activity in the countries, like in healthcare, general services, even in education, elderly care. And even we have very highly educated people coming from West Asia and Africa, and they are contributing to the well-being of European economies. That's not being recognized. So the only things people here, politicians, focus on is the negative impact of immigration. So, but sum total, yes, we will face more problems if the geopolitical situation in the world continues as it is, or as the economic conditions continue as they are. We need development and peace. Look, the EU countries in the recent war on Iran, many of the leaders in the EU, they were cheerleaders for President Trump to attack Iran, including the German chancellor, who encouraged this war. And Iran, with 90 million people, surrounded by other fragile nations, which go up to 200, 300 million people, if that war had succeeded in achieving its goals and regime change in Iran and the total dismemberment of the country's ethnic and sectarian groups, we would have tens of millions of people leaving the country. And where would they go for safety? They would go to Europe, of course. So the EU should stop supporting policies which contribute to this mass immigration problem.
Thank you very much. That was Hossein Askari, Vice President of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. Coming up, U.S. President Donald Trump announces negotiations with Iran will begin early this week. This is World Today. We'll be back. U.S. President Donald Trump says negotiations with Iran will begin on Monday after backtracking on his threat to launch a new attack. Trump says the talks will cover reopening the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's denuclearization. Iran has yet to respond to the U.S. president's announcement of new talks. Meanwhile, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian says the country must compel the U.S. to stay committed to the Memorandum of Understanding the two sides agreed on in June. Renewed U.S. threats to attack Iran have raised concerns among countries in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and others have urged the two sides to de-escalate tensions. Now for more, we're joined by Dr. Wang Jing, Middle East expert in Xi'an, China. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Wang.
It's my great pleasure.
President Donald Trump says the U.S. and Iran will resume negotiations after threatening another military strike. So what do you make of this sudden shift?
I think it's because of the quick situation transformation. And if we look at what has happened during the past more than 2 weeks, or actually during nearly 1 month, the United States restart military strikes against Iran. Iran launched counterattacks against the targets of the United States military bases in neighboring, but not only neighboring, but also many other Middle Eastern countries. And also the situation started to further escalate and led to the crisis of not only the Strait of Hormuz, but also the problem in the Red Sea. So actually everybody has been affected, and everyone has been, a lot of countries has been brought into the war. So according to these things, the United States has to into the kind of the conflicting situation. On the one hand, the United States hopes to continue to impose pressure and threat against Iran to force them to make concessions, but also on the other hand, these pressure actually do not work, and these pressures will continue to be resisted by Iran. So that's why I think the situation or the attitudes of the United States leader, they transferred and changed very quickly from one point to the other, and then from that point to back. So to some extent back and forth. That's because the situation's too conflicting, and the situation then changed so fast.
According to Trump, the talks will focus on reopening the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's denuclearization. How difficult will it be to reach agreement on these two highly sensitive issues?
Well, these two issues are the very central issues for United States and Iran because the Strait of Hormuz is a very immediate point for the restarting of the conflict between United States and Iran recently, and also the Iran nuclear issue is a very important fundamental issue that has been the obstacle for the relations between United States and Iran. So I don't think it would be the easy task to reach the kind of the deal between the two countries because the two countries have different understandings of what should be done. Briefly speaking, the United States hopes that the Strait of Hormuz should be reopened without any intervention and should back to the status before the war in late February. And from Iran's perspective, the Strait of Hormuz should be dominated by Tehran. The international community, of course, should recognize their authority. And also, when talk about the Iran nuclear issue, they also have different understandings. The United States believes that the Iran nuclear issue is a very important one, and that the denuclearization should be the priority. Other from the perspective of Iran, they believe that you have the right to maintain the nuclear capability without any pressure from external countries, particularly from the United States. So I don't think it would be the easy job. To go back to the negotiations is one thing, but to reach a deal is another thing.
Then if negotiations do move forward, what are likely to be the biggest sticking points, and where do you see the greatest room for compromise?
Well, I think the biggest obstacle would be how to restart, how to reconstruct the kind of mechanism that could guarantee the consensus could be implemented because the United States and Iran, they have different understandings, and it would be the difficult job to end all the divisions within the short term. These divisions will continue. And also, but there was some kind of room for compromise. But let's be frank, it would be difficult because the United States and Iran, they might compromise each other, for example, over kind of a timeline for negotiation, or the timeline for end this problem and another problem. But I don't think these are the easy thing because when we are talking about some mechanism or some deal or some breakthrough that could end all the divisions has been lasted for quite a long time, and that could reconstruct the trust between the two countries, which are hostile to each other for several decades. That's not an easy task. So, of course, we expect and we hope that the negotiation would come back and the negotiations will lead to a breakthrough, but I don't think it's an easy task.
And now, if the new round of negotiations reaches a deadlock, what military and humanitarian risks may recur in the Middle East, especially around the Strait of Hormuz?
I think we have to be clear. We have to be realistic. Although we hope that peace could come back and everything will go well and the world peace will come back, blah 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 blah. My point of view is that we have to be clear. We have to be realistic because we're talking about the reality. We're not making wishes. We are talking about reality. The reality is that the Strait of Hormuz will face obstacles in the future. Iran's decision to impose obstacle to impose to some extent the dominant measures against the Strait of Hormuz is irreversible. It's closely related to Iran's internal decision, internal politics, not only the pressure from the United States. And also, the United States has to accept to some extent the new status, a new situation will be in the Strait of Hormuz, that the Strait of Hormuz could not go back to the status before the war in late February, as we just mentioned. So that's why, to some extent, the kind of the closure or half closure, semi-closure of Strait of Hormuz will continue, and the cost of the transportation system in the Strait of Hormuz will grow. And also the hostilities will continue, which means that the oil and the energy price will grow up very quickly, and particularly from time to time. So we are facing a new situation. We cannot repeat our experience or someone said the so-called histories and to the new and the future status. We have to learn, but also we have to accept the new reality. That is something that I think we have to be very clear.
And finally, countries including Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have urged both sides to de-escalate tensions. How concerned are regional powers that another round of conflict could destabilize the Middle East?
I think the biggest concern is that this conflict that is ongoing right now is to some extent expanding. We're looking at that the war is not just happening in the Strait of Hormuz between Iran and the United States, actually expanding to Yemen and to Iraq and to the Red Sea, to the areas where the old hostilities maintained. To some extent, I mean, during the past 2 or 3 years, let's be clear or let's be frank, many countries are too optimistic. They are optimistic about the peace prospect of Iran and Saudi. They are too confident about the peace maintenance in Yemen, in Iraq, and in other parts of the region. But then, if we look at what is happening right now, that the fragile balance in this region are now under the threat of being violated, and ancient or the old hatred and hostilities are coming back. So in Yemen, we're looking at the war are escalated between Saudi Arabia and Yemen Houthi, and between Yemen Houthi and Yemen government supported by Saudi. And also in Iraq, we are facing the new possibilities of conflict escalating between the Iraq government and also the Iraq local Shia militias, which is called the Hashd Sha'bi for quite a long time. So that's why we have to accept that the war now is under the threat of further expanding. So that's why it's highly necessary to find ways that the war should be controlled and the situation should be monitored closely.
Thank you very much. That was Dr. Wang Jin, Middle East expert in Xi'an, China. This is World Today. Stay tuned. FIFA President Gianni Infantino is facing mounting pressure over his leadership after controversial commercial proposal sparked a widening backlash across world football. European football's governing body, UEFA, has threatened legal action over Infantino's plan to sell a 20% stake in FIFA's commercial rights. It has also warned him not to destroy any documents related to the proposal. Media reports say a growing number of UEFA members are discussing formally withdrawing their support for Infantino's re-election. The proposal unveiled early last week met fierce opposition from UEFA and its member associations, which warned they could boycott future FIFA competitions if it moved forward. Infantino has since withdrawn the plan, but the controversy has raised fresh questions about his leadership just months before FIFA's presidential election. Now for more, joining us in the studio is my colleague Song Ruixin. Ruixin, thank you for being here.
Hello.
First of all, could you please help us understand what's at the heart of this dispute? What exactly was FIFA proposing? And why did it provoke such a strong backlash across Europe?
I think at the heart of this debate is actually a very simple but sensitive question. Who owns the World Cup? Like what FIFA proposed through a new entity called FIFA Forward Enterprise, or FFE, was to create a $20 billion subsidiary and sell a minority stake in the World Cup and other FIFA competitions to private investors. So in simple terms, FIFA wanted to bring private capital into the World Cup business and arguing that more investment would create more revenue and allow more funding for football development around the world. But the reaction in Europe, like you said, was immediate and strongly negative because I think it was about principle. Like Union of European Football Associations argued that the soul and governance of football are not assets for sale. So for many, like the World Cup is not just a commercial product. It represents players and fans and nations. And it was about process. Many football organizations felt they were not properly consulted and that such a major decision about the future of the game was being made without enough discussion. They feel, and that's weird. And third, it raised a deeper question: who should benefit from the growing commercial value of football? The players, the fans, or communities are the ones who create that value. So many critics questioned whether more commercialization would truly serve the people at the heart of the game.
Then looking at it from FIFA's perspective, was this in some ways a pragmatic attempt to secure new funding? And with the global economy under pressure and competition for sponsorship dollars growing, was Infantino simply trying to find a new way forward?
I think you can understand the logic behind the proposal in this way. FIFA, like many sports organizations, is looking at a changing media landscape, including traditional broadcasters are under pressure and digital platforms are changing how people consume sports, and competition for sponsorship money is becoming tougher. So from FIFA's perspective, the thinking is probably, let's say, we need to diversify our income, attract new investors, and create more financial resources for football development. But the problem here was not necessarily the idea of finding new revenue streams. The problem, I think, was the way FIFA tried to do it. And politically saying, I think FIFA underestimated how strongly people feel about the World Cup. Like for many fans, the football organizations, this is something with cultural and emotional value. So FIFA may have seen this as a financial strategy, but many critics saw it as a crossing a line, because the ultimate stakeholders of sport are not only those who administer it or invest in it or compete in it. They are the athletes who perform, or the communities that host, and the fans who fill stadiums and watch from home and keep the spirit of sport alive.
And building on that, some observers say this isn't just about one controversial proposal, but about deeper concerns over FIFA's governance and decision-making. Do you agree with it?
Well, I think this proposal was really just the trigger. This frustration had been building for years. And I recently came across a commentary by a well-known sports journalist called, his name is Alan Abrahamson, who argued that global sport is entering a new phase where organizations like FIFA and the IOC need to rethink how they balance commercial growth with accountability. And I think that gets to the main point of this debate. The problem here is not simply that FIFA wants to make more money. Every major sports organization has to think about revenue and investment and long-term sustainability, that's for sure. The bigger question is, as these organizations become more powerful and more commercialized, who gets a say in how they are run? Because today there is a growing gap between the people who create the value of sport and the people who make the biggest decisions. Like athletes are asking whether they have enough influence over decisions that directly affect their careers and their workload. And fans, of course, are asking whether their voices matter when ticket prices rise and competition formats change or traditions are altered. And sponsors and governments, I think they are also demanding more transparency because more money is flowing through global sporting events than ever before. And this is where FIFA's governance model is facing pressure. I think so. The organization has grown into a global commercial powerhouse, but many critics argue that its decision-making structures have not evolved at the same pace.
And finally, within 1 minute, what does all this mean for Infantino's re-election prospects? And what does it mean for FIFA and its relationship with European football going forward?
I think the situation is more uncertain than it was before, but Infantino is far more politically I would say is far more from politically finished. His decision to withdraw the proposal quickly helped him avoid a prolonged battle. It also allowed him to present him as someone who willing to listen and maintain unity. But at the same time, the episode has damaged the image that his re-election is inevitable. So the next FIFA presidential election in 2027 will likely attract more attention, and potential challenges challengers may see this as an opportunity. So that said, Infantino still has significant support, particularly among many football associations in Asia and Africa. So the race is far from decided. I would say the bigger issue is the relationship between FIFA and European football.
Thank you very much. That was my colleague Songrui Shen. And that's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm Do Hongyu in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.